I think a key thing is what is that founder's propensity or willingness to actually share in the success of the company. A founder who's not going to be willing to give up some of that equity to bring in the right people, to surround themselves with the right team, would probably be a red flag for me. It's, and once again, I can only take from my own past experience, my own personal experience is that, I had a smaller share of what I believe was a much bigger pie in the end. And I think it's really key to us that every founder that we back is willing to set up an ESOP, is willing to give up some of their own equity to make sure that they surround themselves with the right people in those areas where they may not have that skill set.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 157 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. I'm delighted to have returning guest, David Sheine, the co-founder and general partner at our innovation fund, as my guest for this episode. David was last on this podcast a year ago, where he shared his journey and lessons as the founder of Comtech, a company that he built to 1,400 staff, before eventually exiting to Dimension Data for over $1 billion. We also touched on his role as the co-founder and general partner at our innovation fund, which has just gone on to raise its third fund of over $100 million. David has come back on the podcast to talk about his newly published book, The Dumbest Guy at the Table: How I Built Australia's First Unicorn, to share some of his many lessons and insights from his time at Comtech and as an investor. Most importantly, 100% of the proceeds from this book will go to the Black Dog Institute to raise money for mental health research. In this interview, we covered a wide range of topics, including the importance of keeping your A players and what to do with bad hires, what David looks for when making early stage investments, lessons from legendary sport figures such as Bob Dwyer and Ian Chappell, both of whom were on the board of Comtech, why founders need to keep it simple, and much more. Before we get into this episode though, a little spoiler alert that at the end of this episode, I mentioned that I will be buying a few copies of this book and sending them to listeners of the show. So make sure that you stick around till the end for more details. But without further ado, here's my interview with David Sheine. Hi, David. Welcome back to the Startup Playbook Podcast. For those people that perhaps missed our initial interview, we did an interview about a year ago. And for those people that haven't had a chance to listen to it, highly recommend going back through that interview. There were so many nuggets of wisdom. But David, for those people that maybe haven't had a chance to listen back to that interview or haven't had an opportunity to get to know you before, do you want to share a little bit about your background and what got you here today?
Thank you, Rohit. And it's great to be back on the show, especially I didn't expect to be back as quickly as this, but I've got to say you're part of the reason that I am back on the show, because I had written this book that had been sitting in a drawer for about 2 years, and following the webinar that I did with you, I got such amazing feedback that I actually thought maybe people do want to hear the story, and so I guess you inspired me to do that. What I'm going to urge your listeners is, please don't listen to that webinar that Rohit did. Go and spend $29.95, buy my book. 100% of the proceeds are going to the Black Dog Institute. And a lot of those lessons that I spoke about on the webinar will be, I'd say most of them are going to be in that book. So of course, I'd like you to listen to that too, but don't forget, it's an amazing cause, the Black Dog Institute, the organization that deals with mental illness. And I'm proud to have dedicated the book to a really good friend of mine who suffered from mental illness and succumbed to that illness. So I haven't answered your question, Rohit. How did I get here? I turned 61 actually last Sunday, and one of the few benefits of being as old as I am is that I was lucky enough to get into the technology industry in a really early age. It was in the probably 1980, 81, and pretty much got involved in computers, using it as a tool for doing people's books. It was pre-MIOB and 0 days, but just doing people's books, being an accountant by profession. I was absolutely fascinated by what what technology could provide in terms of the value that you could add to customers. And I've seen so many changes in the industry. In my day, companies were moving from a mainframe, a mini computing environment, which was hosted offsite, to an on-premises environment. I've seen the internet era. I've seen cloud computing. So I've seen so much from a technology point of view, change. But what hasn't changed is that every company still has customers, they still have staff, and they still have business partners. And I absolutely believe more than ever, the way you treat those three constituents will be the difference between building a good company, a great company, an average company, or one that just simply disappears. And I hope that some of the tips in my book provide leaders or managers with some of the tools that I've found have really served me unbelievably well to build some great companies.
Yeah, and I think that you're also massively underplaying what you built at Comtech as well. So for those listeners that aren't familiar with David's background, he built an incredible business that I think employed around 1,400 staff in the end and sold for an enterprise value of over $1 billion.
Yeah, I think so. I was a young founder. I was 26 when I started. I started on my own. And we grew the company there were 1,400 people when I sold the company to, believe it or not, a South African company who I hadn't heard of. They started after I'd left, emigrated from South Africa in 1986. And we had 1,400 people. We did about $700 million of revenue. We had been profitable, which was very, very different. Somebody said to me recently, Dave, I always learned from you, revenue is vanity and profitability is sanity. And I said, mate, I've become a dinosaur. I said, today revenue is vanity and profitability is insanity. So I think our business model was extremely different to some of the companies that we invest in today, where growth is absolutely more important than profits in the early years. I mean, but one thing we always understand is that there is no business that's ever survived in history that hasn't ultimately generated positive cash flows and profits.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of the book, as you mentioned, in the last interview, we just scratched the surface around some of the sort of lessons and the incredible story behind what you built at Comtech. There's so much that's packed into your book, and so many different angles that I can start with. But I thought that one of the things that I loved about your book from a starting point was how you really started with a touch of realism around founder stories. So a lot of it is built on the lessons. A lot of the book is based around the lessons of your time in building Comtech into the incredible business that it was. But you started with some advice that your dad gave to you that you said that you would tell your kids very differently. Do you want to share what that advice is and why your advice would be different to your own kids?
So my dad always used to say to us, I have two older brothers who were both actually in the business, and there's a chapter on that as well about working with family. But my dad always used to say to us, rather earn 50 cents for yourself than $1 from somebody else. And I always say that's the exact opposite advice that I'd give my own boys. And the reason for that is that I've seen so many people work in some amazing companies in my day, in the Cisco's and Microsofts and Netscapes, today, Afterpay's, Canvas, Zips, where people haven't had to have all the aggravation of running their own business, all the stress, but have been able to share in the success of the company in the form of stock, of stock options and earning a market-related salary. However, if any of my three boys wanted to start a business, I would absolutely back them to the hilt. I mean, how could I not when I consider where I am today as a result of taking that chance? But I would say to them, if after a reasonable period of time, you're not earning at least as much as you would on a job, and two, you're not building an asset that you can sell one day, don't waste your time. And I have seen some founders who have gone on and gone on too long, and I really believe to the detriment of their careers, because they've just sometimes not every startup works, and I think it's sometimes just facing up to reality and saying, I've given this the best possible shot and it's not working, and it's time for me to move on and do something different. I mean, there's a founder who I backed I think it was his second startup, who's done unbelievably well in his third startup, who kicked off and he had a golf. He was selling custom-made golf clubs, and you could pretty much design the color of your shaft, and you could design the color of the grip. He told me he was going to revolutionize the golf industry. And every year he was doing the first year did $1 million and made $80,000 profit, which was fantastic. The problem was the second year he did $1 million and made $80,000 profit. And the third year did $1 million and $80,000 profit. And he always just said to him, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I've got friends who work at Macquarie Bank who are earning so much more than me. I said, Brad, it's not working. There is no momentum. There is no momentum in this business. You should throw in the towel, and you've given it your best shot, and there's nothing you can be. You've learned more than you would on an MBA. And to his credit, he did throw in the towel. I think he sold the company to, it was called Double Ucom or something like that. Then went and started another company called BuyReply, which became CalReply, which ultimately got sold to Rock. And he did unbelievably well as a founder. And his third career started a new company called QuadPay in the US, which is now Zip Money. And I think Brad was big enough to say, I'm not earning at least as much as I would on a job, and I'm not building an asset that I can sell one day. And was big enough to say, I'm going to face reality as it is, not as it was or I wish it to be, and it's time to move on. And it was, a phenomenal decision for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes so much of that can come down to your own perspective of, having sort of really narrow tunnel vision. And I guess that sort of relates to one of the other, one of the big themes, obviously, through the book is the importance of team. And one of the other chapters that I absolutely loved was around the 1%. And you speaking about how a 1% difference between you and the next person can make that other person seem like an expert. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. Again, do you want to sort of extrapolate a little bit more in terms of some of the mistakes that founders make in following that 1% rule?
Well, I think, when you know nothing, someone who has I guess the old expression was saying, in the land of the jungle, the one-eyed lion is king. And, so when you know nothing and somebody shouts a few buzzwords, you think, wow, this person's unbelievable. And I mean, it happened to me. When I started selling network adapters, I pretty much, I learned that an Ethernet network uses 50 ohm cable. You can join the cable up to 185 meters, and you need a terminator at both ends. And I told my brother, who hadn't actually joined the company yet, I said, come with me, I'm going to do a sales presentation. And I started shouting off these buzzwords, which I just literally seen on the back of a brochure. My brother got in the car, both of us are accountants, and said, that's unbelievable, you're a genius. But I wasn't. I'm technically incompetent. I always say, if I change a plug at home, my wife takes the family outside in case I blow the house apart. But to him, I was a genius. And I sometimes think people, and I think I gave the example in my book of a founder who said he was going to build the next Comtech, and like me, an accountant, and he had hired tech guys who to him were amazing, but really, to a really good technical person, really didn't have the skills that were going to be needed to build an unbelievably successful technical company. So I think it's really important when you're not sure and you're trying to fill an unbelievably critical position, like finding a CTO if you're not a technical person, or trying to find an accountant if you're a tech founder and you want a really amazing CFO, is to try and work with people who can really add value in that recruitment and interview process. Because as I say, if you're not sure of something, it may sound like someone's an expert, but they may not be.
Yeah. And, as I've just mentioned, one of the recurring themes through multiple conversations that we've had through the previous podcast, through your book, and also through many interviews around the podcast has been just the importance of having the right team there. It's one of the things that, I think a lot of founders, it's impossible to get hiring right 100% of the time. I think the more important thing is what happens when you don't do it, when you've hired potentially the wrong person. And one of the things that really resonated with me around the book was a quote that you wrote that I'm going to read out. And the quote is, because I considered Comtech as a family, I always worried that if I asked someone to leave the company, it may have a negative effect on our culture. How wrong I was. I believe that I sometimes lost respect as a manager because I didn't make the tough decisions soon enough. My strong recommendation is always to be fair first and tough second, but don't err on the fair side for too long, a mistake I often made. And that's definitely something that I learned the hard way, unfortunately. And it's something that I've seen a lot of other founders make as well. Again, for potential first-time founders or for founders that are in that situation, do you have any advice on how to handle, being in that potential situation where you haven't made the right hire and you've sort of come to realize that it's not the right fit?
Nobody, as I said, breaking up is never easy. And there's nothing easier than saying, hey, Rohit, well done. You did an amazing job on that, on that implementation at ANZ Bank. I just want to thank you and keep up the great work. It's much harder having those tough conversations. Nobody wants to go and say, Rohit, you really stuffed up, you don't. But it's conversations that when you know it's not right, the best advice I can give to any founder, when you know it's not right, and cut your losses as quickly as possible. And as I said, it's not something you want to do often. You want to make the right decision more often than not. But when you know it's not right, I still remember the first person that I ever asked to leave the company, and I was literally trembling because it's not an easy, especially I'd like to think of myself. I did a podcast or a webinar with one of our portfolio companies the other day, and they were asking me about different types of leadership. And when I look at myself, I really believe that if I look at the unbelievably successful leaders today, the one that I really relate to the most would be a Satya Nadella or a Bob Iger. That's the kind of leader that I would aspire to be. There's other leaders. There's Elon Musk and there's Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. And I don't want to say other people may aspire to be like them. It's just different. But for me, I was always an empathetic leader, and that's what resonates with me. But even then, I would be sure that Satya Nadella or Bob Iger would have had to have tough conversations sometimes. And as I say, I still believe fair first, tough second. But when you know it's not right and you've really tried to help educate that person to try and get the skill set they need, or to try and fit into the culture of the company, if it's not working, cut your losses early. And I must say, I did say, right at the back of the book, if I haven't quoted anybody, it's only because I read so much. I've always been fascinated with leadership. But I think it actually came from the Netflix playbook, where Reed Hastings said, in his first company, he treated everyone as a family. And he said, with family, you may have a brother who robbed a bank, went to jail, but he's still your brother. You still have to love your brother because he's family and he's part of the family. When you have someone on the team who's not performing or letting a team down, it's easier to say that person's not going to be on the team anymore. You can't say to someone, you're not going to be on the family anymore. And that would be my advice to a founder. Understand that you will lose respect as a leader if you don't make the tough decisions early.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the best bits of advice that I've gotten on this podcast has been, your intuition will generally always be right. And oftentimes if you're hiring someone and you don't think that they're the perfect fit, but you think you've got some hesitancies about them, but you think that you might be able to overcome them through, particular forms of things. His advice was, those things never go away. If anything, they become bigger, even bigger over time. Yeah. It's really, really important to have a high bar, especially when it comes to hiring in your team.
And I think there's having that intuition of someone who you know is going to fit into the company, but may not have all the skills, versus someone who has all the skills, but you feel a hesitancy about whether they're going to fit going to share the values and fit into the company. And I think, I would always err on when you find someone who you think is going to be an unbelievably good team player, but they may, for example, be, a Microsoft Azure expert, but your platform's done on AWS. But you say this person would be a phenomenal resource. What a pity they're not AWS guys, they're Azure guys. I would basically say, if you think that person's the right person, invest in re-engineering that person's skills. Hire for attitude, train for skills. When someone's not going to fit in, you'd much rather hire that person than say, wow, this person's an amazing AWS person, but you can just see that they're just not going to be the right person for this company. Rather take the person who doesn't have the skills and help educate them to get those skills and I think you'd never look back.
Yeah, and just to keep my employer happy, AWS is always the right decision for startups.
Well, what I'm going to just say is that Amazon have been unbelievably supportive in helping with the distribution of this book. I cannot, I did post it on LinkedIn. I'm humbled by some of the responses I've had on my LinkedIn post. So, but it just shows that the attention to detail from a customer service point of view and their commitment to support Black Dog has been absolutely unbelievable. And it just shows that no matter how big you are as a company, there is no excuse for not delivering fanatical customer service. So I really want to say, Rohit, that you can be proud that you work for an amazing company who really does care about customers and the community. So I say that's my pause for a plug on Amazon.
Thank you. I guess just going back to the team dynamic and sort of looking at it from the lens that you sort of spend the majority of your time now day to day. So again, I don't think that we mentioned this as part of your introduction, but you run our innovation fund, which is a closing in on $100 million fund.
It's actually it is closed now, and it's ended up at 116,500,000 to be exact. So,
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very exciting. There's one thing that you mentioned is, from your experience as a founder in terms of lessons that you've learned in hiring. I'm really curious to know from the other side of the table as an investor, when you are assessing, especially early stage opportunities, which is where our innovation fund, does the majority of its investments. What are things that you look for in terms of team dynamics, and how do you go about assessing that to ensure that they are the right team that you're looking to invest in?
So, once again, right, in the book, there's a chapter called The Power of Two that I always say rules are made to be broken. So it's not that we'd only invest in a company if there were co-founders, one a front of house guy, one a back of house person. But I really believe, even from my own experience as a founder, even though I was the sole founder, my one brother joined a year later, and we really joined at the hip, and we really ran that company together. And if you look at some of the most successful companies in the world today, I'll take Australia, the three big ones, Afterpay, Nick and Anthony, Canva, Mel and Cliff, Atlassian, Mike and Scott, and Zip. We backed Zip money because love Larry, unbelievably charismatic, sales-oriented founder. But in Peter, he had an amazing back-of-house guy. And for a company that was going to be lending money, it's quite a critical part of the business. So we love the fact that there were co-founders over there. So I think that where there isn't a co-founder, we have lots of investments where there are sole founders, and it's I think a key thing is what is that founder's propensity or willingness to actually share in the success of the company. A founder who's not going to be willing to give up some of that equity to bring in the right people, to surround themselves with the right team, would probably be a red flag for me. It's and once again, I can only take from my own past experience, my own personal experience is that I had a smaller share of what I believe was a much bigger pie in the end, and I think it's really key to us that every founder that we back is willing to set up an ESOP, is willing to give up some of their own equity to make sure that they surround themselves with the right people in those areas where they may not have that skill set.
Yeah, I want to come back to ESOPs in a moment, but in the last episode, I sat down with Matt Brown, who is the managing partner of Black Nova Ventures, and one of the things that we discussed was how they invest in pre-revenue and pre-product companies, where literally the majority of the investment sits on the team. And we were talking about how, with limited data points, how can a particular founder build up that conviction from an investor that they're worth backing? Are there sort of specific things that you look for outside of them sort of having the propensity to share with their wider team that really sort of get you excited from an R Innovation Fund perspective of backing a team or a founder?
I probably said it on our interview, on the first webinar that we did, Rohit, but I think the one thing I am pretty good at, and I'm not good at a lot of things, so I don't want to sound like I'm arrogant, but I'm pretty good at meeting someone fairly quickly and saying, I think this person is is going to fit into the company, or I think this person is really, really backable. And I think I'd like to think that my success as a venture capitalist, which has now been going on for, my first VC investment was 20 years ago. And if I count the number of failures I've had, I can count them on one hand, of which two I invested in. I didn't want to invest in the first place. Okay, I think I may have mentioned that on the last year. That you'd have to excuse me for being 61 if I'm repeating myself. Okay, and but I think that's the one thing I'm good at, and probably the one challenge that I found over COVID is backing someone over a Zoom or a Teams meeting where you don't get to sit down with someone, have a beer, have a cup of coffee. So, I mean, you are going a lot on your gut feel. Absolutely. As you said, there's no data points. You're saying what likelihood does this person have of executing on that business plan? Every business plan that a founder puts together always looks amazing. We're going to lose quite a lot of money in year one. Year two, we're going to get close to break even. And by year three, it's going to be a hockey stick growth, and it's going to be, and it's then saying, what likelihood do I believe this person has of executing on that plan? And I think, once again, I know I say it all the time, and I didn't not back Nick Molnar because I didn't think he could execute on a business plan. It was, you have to first of all assess what do you think the likelihood is that the founder is going to execute. And is the valuation a fair valuation considering where the company is? And I think also on the founder, you also want to know, as I said, their willingness to being willing to share in their own equity. And second of all, I think their willingness to actually give up, to grow. You have to let go. And I think my strength was I was just over the moon when I was able to find tech guys and say, I don't have to ever worry about that part of the company again. As long as Nathan and Darren are taking care of that, I know it's in good hands. There's nothing that I can do better in tech support than what they do. I think you'd also want to make sure that the person that you're backing is going to be willing, that they're not going to be micromanagers. You can't afford to be a micromanager in a startup. Things are happening so quickly on the fly that you really need people in those key positions to be able to make those decisions, and that's the only way you can grow.
I did promise that I would come back to ESOPs. And, one of the things that you shared in the book was how, although they're fairly common practice now, it was something that was very rarely done when Comtech was a company. And I think that you shared a story about going to your lawyer or accountant and asking them to set this up. And they spoke about all the challenges and the difficulties that you would have. And you said, I didn't come to you to tell me how difficult it would be. I want you to figure out how we can make this happen. Do you want to share why that's sort of important? And I guess, feeding into the broader topic around company culture as well, which again is one of the big themes of the book and your story with Comtech, how you personally think about culture and how you sort of provide that advice to founders in your portfolio companies in terms of how to build that really strong engagement and culture within their own companies.
Building a culture, in my opinion, doesn't boil down to one thing. Anyone who thinks because I've given Mary 10,000 shares, which may be 0.0001% of the company, that's how I'm going to get a culture, because they're going to feel a sense of ownership, or because I do yoga classes every Thursday at the office. I really believe if I really boil down to what culture is, or the best way to build a culture is to actually do what you say. It's no use saying we sincerely care about our staff if you don't. It's no use saying we absolutely committed to legendary customer service if you really don't care about customers. It's making sure that you live and breathe, that your actions are louder than your words. And I think on the ESOP, it's a tool to as part of building that culture where people do feel a sense of ownership. But nobody's going to work in a company just because they own a minuscule share that may actually vest. If I look at our own portfolio at OIF, we're about to do our first distribution of capital. We've been going for over 5 years. So if you're a staff member in the same company that we've invested in, you might have been there for 7 years, and with a tiny share of a company that so if you're not being paid a market-related salary, if you hate going to work every day, and you have no say in doing what, no say in the way things should get, especially your part of the company should get run, you're not going to stick around in a company just because you've got this tiny little piece of equity. And by the way, you wouldn't want people just sitting in a company because they have equity, saying, I hate coming to work every day, but I'm just going to let my stock options vest. I've got another 6 months to run, and then I'm out of here. So I really believe when building a culture, as I say, from every point of view, is that you live and breathe what you say. Your actions match your words. I mean, my biggest fear as a CEO was honestly standing up and saying, which is in my book, we genuinely take care of our customers, our suppliers, and our business partners, or someone else will. My biggest fear was saying that, and people in our company saying, what a load of crap. Okay. I wanted people to say, I'm proud that I work in a company that what the CEO of this company says, they actually mean.
David, I don't think this is something that I have shared with you in detail, but one of the things that, following on from my interview last year, that I've shared with other people is that, in doing research for the interview, I spoke to a couple of your early employees and people that sort of knew you from the early days of Comtech and stayed with the company for an extended period of time. And one of the things that really stuck with me from those conversations were how each of them were able to recite slogans, the values, and everything, in the exact same way 20 years after you had sort of left the company. And I think one of the challenges about culture in general is that it can be really hard to I guess, grasp or kind of know how to embed that. But do you want to talk a little bit about your approach? Obviously you spoke about doing the things that you say that you're going to do, but once a company has sort of defined what those values are and potentially defined them for the first time, how do you go about in terms of embedding that across the entire team to get sort of buy-in and to make sure that everyone's sort of really closely aligned and is aware of what those values are?
So that's a great question, Rick. Thank you. So the book's called The Dumbest Guy at the Table for good reason. I'm a very simple person. And I think probably what I think we did unbelievably well is that we didn't change our message over all the years. That obviously, our products or the services that we offered changed over a period of over the 14 years that I was in the company. What never changed was the values and the messages that we gave to our staff or our customers. And I really believe that's why people still recite those same basic principles. And it sounds, I still remember, the guy who ran our Brisbane office, Joe DeAlio, said to me, Dave, you're running the KISS principle, which was, I think I kept it simple. And somebody once, and by the way, I always used to find, something on the back page of a newspaper to change, because I'm so conscious that I used to tell the same story again and again and again, that I always used to want to have a new story to talk about. And usually, where did I go and find something to change my slide presentation? I'd find something on the back page of a newspaper. And so to give you an example, I happened to watch on Netflix yesterday. There's a great program now. It's called Bad Sport, and it's about some of the biggest scams in sport. One of them, if you follow cricket, was of the South African cricket captain Hansie Cronje. And Hansie Cronje was, if you said to me, here's 8 captains that have been taking bribes to fix cricket games, the last captain that I would have put on my list of the 8 leading countries in the world would have been Hansie Cronje. And he was absolutely revered in South Africa. He was regarded as the second most influential person to Nelson Mandela for uniting the country, and ended up taking money and fixing cricket games. So, so when I would potentially talk about about company culture, and that, I may say you can lose money, lots of it, but you can't lose your reputation, not a shred of it. I'd go and say, like Hansi Cronje, and if you look at what he did, he had this amazing reputation and blew it overnight for stupid, for $30,000 to kick off with. And so we had the same message again and again. And there may have been a few new stories, like a Hansi Cronje would have got tossed in, or at the moment I'm obsessed with Ted Lasso, because I think it's absolutely a great depiction of what culture is about. And I remember I had a guy in my company who one day said to me, he said, you keep telling the same stories. And I got a little bit upset, because he was right, I did. And you sometimes doubt yourself as a leader. And just by chance, I happened to read an article about Jack Welch. And Jack Welch in my day was the most inspirational CEO in America. He ran General Electric's unbelievably successfully for 20 years. And I said in the 6 years that Jack Welch had been at GE, he only had 6 messages, of which the last one was e-commerce, e-commerce, and e-commerce. And I thought, if it's good enough for Jack Welch to have had 6 messages over the last 20 years, it's good enough for David Sheine at Comtech. And despite what Mario, who was the guy who told me I kept saying the same things, despite what Mario said. So my advice would be to a founder, don't waver. Once you have those values and those visions, just keep on that path. And of course, sometimes things have to change. And so, for example, when the 2 products that pretty much built our business, Novell and Synoptics, were getting killed by Microsoft and Cisco, our vision was, our vision said, we sell the number 1 or number 2 product in the industry. If I didn't change to embrace Cisco and Microsoft, we would have died like Novell and Synoptics. So we changed it. We said, I signed up with Cisco and I signed up with Microsoft, and I said, we sell the number 1 and number 2 product in the industry. And it was just that one word. And yes, it was a change from what I'd been saying for the first 9 years of our existence. But if I didn't change that tiny little word, I wouldn't be on this webinar today.
I guess just unpacking one of the things that you mentioned in terms of keeping it simple. Again, from the conversations that I've had with a lot of founders, one of the most challenging things is there are so many different opportunities, there are so many different things. And one of the traits of some of the best founders that I've had on this podcast has been just their ability to really come back into a very clear, simple message and just be able to simplify, very complex issues. Do you have, again, any advice for founders in terms of how they can, I guess, get back to that North Star, or really sort of simplify things that may seem really complex?
Well, I think if you've got conviction about what you're doing and you stay the course, don't get sidetracked by some of the other opportunities that may come in. And I'm famous for saying you have to be as focused as a one-eyed dog in a meat factory. And as I've now changed that, as you would have read in my book, to saying I'll give you 39 billion reasons why I'm actually right. So if you go and look at keeping a message simple, there is no better example of Afterpay. You're paying 4 installments. It's what they've done for the last 7 years. And I'm sure the product is a better product today than what it was, in terms of how they integrate, in terms of what it looks like, in terms of how they're able to direct more and more leads to their customers, and how they're able to generate more revenue for the retailers who are paying them the 4% merchant fee. But it's still paying 4 installments. And it's only 7 years later that they're about to launch the second product. When Steve Jobs went to Apple for the second time, when he was recalled as CEO, he chopped 100 products down to 4, and he said, let's focus on these products, and it's not a bad outcome. So I think often you can you can get sidetracked in a startup because you think if we do this for a big customer, we're going to get $400,000 of professional services fees. But what happens? You're taking all your great engineering resources off your key product and putting them to a different platform that may not be strategic going forward. And you say, well, I've got the $400,000, but you've lost 6 months of momentum in your core product. So I really believe it's having conviction that if you feel you're on the right course, to stay the course and keep investing in that, and not get sideblinded by what else the other opportunities are until your core product's going well. So Afterpay is launching Afterpay Money. Why? Their core product is unbelievably successful. They've got $3.5 million customers. How do we add more value to those customers, and how do we add more value to our own company? And it's the same as Apple. When the iPod was unbelievably successful, what's next? When the iPhone was successful, what's next? We'll build the iPad. And they didn't do all five at the same time.
For anyone that's been listening to the podcast for any length of time knows, I am personally a big fan of sport, especially cricket and soccer. And, I think that there are so many different parallels between sports and business that, again, one of the really interesting things that you sort of spoke about in the book was having Bob Dwyer, who is a former Australian Rugby World Cup winning coach, and also Ian Chappell, who also wrote the foreword for the book as well, as board members of Comtech. And I think Bob mentioned that, I don't necessarily come with any sort of technical background. Why do you want me here? And you spoke about, the skills that he had as a leader were something that were translatable and something that you sort of needed as part of the team at Comtech as well. Can you share what some of the lessons or insights that you picked up were from having both Ian and Bob as part of the board and sort of part of the team more broadly?
I can't emphasize enough that both Ian and Bob were there because they were phenomenal cultural fits for the company, not because Bob was the coach of the Wallabies at the time he became a director of our company, or that Ian had been, if you're a cricket fan, arguably the most successful Australian cricket captain and cricket captain generally. But I think both had values that I really, really aspired to. Both are unbelievably humble people, despite their achievements. Both understood the power of that you can't win a cricket test having amazing batsmen, but bowlers that can't get the opposition out twice, and you can't win a rugby game with amazing forwards and lousy backs, and vice versa. And I really believe that's the same in a company. And it was good to have people who had come from a different type of industry, but when you talk about the power of a team, it's critical that everybody, that there's respect for, I think that's culture as well, by the way, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier, but I think so much, when you talk about the importance of team and that everybody is a key part of a company, it's absolutely respect for the person and respect for the role. So it's not thinking because you're Shane Warne that you're much more important than the wicket keeper, you're much more important than a batsman. That of course you've got to respect Shane Warne, but you also want Shane Warne to respect the wicket keeper and the batsman, knowing that they've also got to deliver for the team to succeed. And I remember playing golf one day with Ian, and we're talking about a player and who had amazing potential and amazing talent, and he got dropped. And I said, why would they have dropped him? And he said, because if he got a century and Australia lost, he would say, what a great game it was. If he got a duck and Australia won, he'd be in the dressing room with a long face. And I think it's the same in a company, that to be successful, if you look at the companies that have been unbelievably successful, there's generally, go and take Zip. Larry did an amazing job of growing the business side, but it wouldn't have worked if all the money they were advancing to customers was resulting in bad debts, and the company just couldn't prove their business model, or that they couldn't prove that the merchants were actually generating higher sales and the conversion rates were higher. And so everybody on that team is important, and I think that's really why yeah, I love, and there's a lot about sport in my book, so you would have probably liked my book because of that. But there is, in my opinion, that's why I love Ted Lasso, because if you're going to take, and you must, if you like soccer, I'm sure you've watched Ted Lasso.
I haven't seen it yet.
You have to watch it.
Yeah,
you got to put it top of your list, because it's not just me saying it. In fact, when I did a webinar for our portfolio companies and talking about company culture, actually, and Emily, who runs our community at OIF, said, you need to give our founders 3 takeaways. And I said, one of them is watch Ted Lasso. And she looked at me like I was crazy. And then I was lucky enough to get Ben Crow. Ben Crow's from Melbourne. He's Ash Barty's mindset coach, amongst others, Dylan Alcott and the Richmond Football Club in Victoria, not the Richmond Soccer Club in Ted Lasso. And what did Ben Crow say? Ben Crow says, you have to watch Ted Lasso, because you'll understand about people and culture when you watch that show. And then, of course, they won a lot of Emmys as well. So it's if any of your listeners haven't watched, I'd highly recommend it, because you really learn about the different types of characters that I talk about in my book. The superstars, the brilliant jerks, the non-performers, and I think it's an entertaining way to learn about culture.
Yeah, I have had that show recommended to me multiple times by so many people. So I will definitely make sure that I add that to my list. Sticking with the sporting team, one other analogy that I loved from the book was you were talking about, or you shared a story about a trade-off for an elite cyclist, and them sort of deciding whether to put on an additional 5 kilograms to become a world-class sprinter, or to lose 5 kilograms and become, a world-class climber. But you can't really do both, and you can't hedge your bets around that. And, I think it's such a great analogy for startups as well, to really think about, who are the types of customers that they want to go for? What is the type of business that they want to build? And again, that sort of looks different for anyone. But again, do you have any advice for founders to help them determine how to gauge those trade-offs and which side of the coin they should pick?
Well, I think it depends what type of company you want to build. There's some companies that, so the example that I gave in the book was, at the one extreme, I gave an Amazon as, the most operationally efficient company on the planet. And, so if somebody wanted to compete in a distribution type business, and you weren't willing to invest in your systems, you're going to have no chance. I mean, when you think about, even if you're going to take AWS and Amazon, on the one extreme, you've got an unbelievably operationally efficient company where your number one asset is absolutely your systems at Amazon. You're barely speaking to people, but you know that if you order something off from Amazon, you know that within, if they tell you that product will be on your doorstep at 9 o'clock the next day, with almost 99.9% certainty that product will be there. So yes, you may have some person packing the goods in a box, and they'll be going to a bin, and it may be replaced by a robot soon, or it may already be replaced by a robot. At the other extreme, you've got AWS. AWS is very much a value add business. You have to invest in your people to be able to add that value to your customers, that you're now trusting some of the world's biggest companies to put their entire business on your platform. You can't just rely on a system. You have to rely on people, and you have to be investing heavily in your engineering team. And of course, your systems are important. You can't give good people lousy systems. But so my analogy is that you have to decide, do I want to be an Amazon or do I want to be an AWS? Where do I want to be? Because if you don't know where you are, the third kind of company is a memory, where you're not investing in your people if you want to be a value add company. And if you're an operationally efficient company, you're not investing in your system. So once again, only because I'm looking at your bookshelf and I see Catch of the Decade, that if you look at what would have been core to Catch, the Catch group, their systems would have been absolutely critical to be able to compete with an eBay, an Amazon, or any other company that was offering similar types of product. And I'm sure that people were an important party. But if those systems didn't deliver, it would not have been catch of the decade. It would have been, caught out. And on the other hand, you get other kinds of businesses. If you go and take a Deliveroo business, you need an operationally efficient business. But from the food side, you need value add. If you're selling high-end food, you want to build an amazing restaurant, you need to make sure that the quality of your product and the quality of your service is absolutely exceptional. You're going to go to a top restaurant. Your number one asset is going to be your chef and your waitering staff. Your number two asset, if you're going to pay $250 for a meal for two at the Rock Pool, you don't care if they're running their system on Vend or on Zero or whatever. What you want to know is that the quality of the food and the quality of the service is phenomenal. And that would be a Neil Perry investing heavily in training his chef and training the waitering staff to know about every single thing on that menu.
Speaking of my bookshelf, and specifically Gabby Leibovich, who was the founder of Catch, who was also a previous guest of the podcast, one of the things that I loved that both of you shared in your books was a bit of advice that your dad gave to you, which was, profits are made on the buying and not the selling, which I think is again, like, I think Gabby mentioned that on the podcast as well, but like really, really fascinating insight into a business. Again, do you mind sort of elaborating what you mean by that?
I think it's like so our original business was we were a distribution company, and the market price was determined by the supplier, by Cisco or by Microsoft, but we were able to sometimes negotiate special deals with suppliers if we bought additional product at the end of the quarter so that they could make their numbers, and if you bought well, you were able to the sell price had been determined. The better you bought, the more margin you made. And it's even the same in VC. We have to decide how much can we afford to pay for an asset to ensure that we get a fair return for the people who've entrusted us with their money. So if you had bought Afterpay when they dropped to $8, you would have done unbelievably well when they sold to Square. If you bought Afterpay at their peak, which I think was $150, you wouldn't have done that well when they sold out to Square. So I think it's really important that, especially when you are a buyer and a seller, as we were, as Gabby was at Catch. If you're buying a house, as I said to someone the other day, they were going to buy a house and I said, this is not a deal. This is a lifestyle decision that you're making. If you end up paying a little bit extra for a house that you're going to go and live in for the next 10 or 15 years, you'd be foolish to say my profit's made in the buying, not the selling, because I hope that in 15 years' time when I sell this house, it's basically it's very different though when your business is I'm buying a portfolio company that we hope to be able to exit in 5 or 6 years. Of course, the entry price is critical as well. So you want to make sure that it's fair, as I said in my book as well. I said when I built my house, I used a builder and I said to him, Ron, how do you work? He said, Dave, it's got to be fair for you and it's got to be fair for me. And and it's the same with us with the portfolio company. It's got to be fair for the founder and it's got to be fair for the fund.
Absolutely. Again, David, like last time we spoke on this podcast, I can talk to you all day, but just to finish off this interview, I think the last question that I asked you last time around was, what are some of the things that you think are true now that will continue to be true in the future? I just wanted to flip that a little bit and speak about one of the things that you spoke about in the book, which was, when Comtech was a business, obviously very much a B2B sales play focused. Yep. And over time, there's been an evolution into marketing-led businesses and now product-led businesses and growth. But despite those kind of changes, what are some of the fundamentals that you think have remained constant over that time and will remain consistent over the future?
And this is not a sales plug for my book, but that I believe my book will still be relevant in 20 years' time, because I still believe, so no matter how you sell your product, whether it's a sales-led model, a marketing-led model, or a product-led growth, you still have customers. you're still going to have staff. You're still going to have, you're either going to have account execs who are going, when you go and look at Afterpay, for example, they would have had account execs who had to do direct business-to-business sales to go and win over the retailers. Then you had, on the consumer side, you had a different type of growth model to engage those 3.5 million consumers who were going to have to download the app and then get them to use it. So I believe no matter what sales method you use, you're still going to have a customer. You're still going to have staff, and you may well have business partners. So if you take a Xero, for example, their business partners are accounting firms. They still have to have amazing relationships with the accounting firms. Their business partners are also the independent software vendors who are building applications around that whole ecosystem. I mean, you go and look at an Apple today where a lot of the ISVs are getting disillusioned because they've got to pay a 30% fee every time because you're using the Apple Store as the marketplace. So I still think my presentation or my book will be relevant in another 20 years' time, because I still think you'll be dealing with those three constituents in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and in 20 years' time. So I think no matter how you distribute and sell your product, you're still going to have to provide what I call legendary customer service, or what Jeff Bezos called fanatical customer service. I always say, if only I knew the difference between legendary and fanatical, the valuation in what that word meant, I probably would have picked fanatical customer service. But I think, customer satisfaction is going to remain critical. And, I think today, right now, the most critical thing for any startup is not, can I raise money? There's so much money in the ecosystem today. If you're a good founder and you've got a good idea, you will get money. There's not even a question. The toughest thing for any company today is attracting and retaining amazing talent. So you have to know, as a founder, how am I going to make sure that I can attract and retain the best people? Because I'm not going to be able to produce the best product without the best developers. I'm not going to be able to get my product to market without the best, whether it's sales-led growth, without the best salespeople, without the best marketing people, or without the best whatever to get my product to market. But you're going to need people.
Fantastic. As you mentioned, those are just some of the topics and chapters that you sort of dug in a little bit deeper. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. I took so many notes, and I think that it's going to be hugely beneficial for anyone who's looking to build a company. And most of all, I think it's for such a fantastic cause as well. As David mentioned, 100% of the proceeds are going towards the Black Dog Institute, which is a fantastic cause as well. What I haven't told David is that I'm going to buy a couple of copies of the book and share this out to people. We're recording this interview a little while before the books are actually publicly available, but I will share the details on social media in terms of how you can get your hands on a copy through the competition that I'm running. But also, David, what's the best way for people to purchase the book themselves?
As I said earlier, Rohit, the guys at Amazon have been unbelievable. That they'll be handling 100% of the distribution. We should be set up on Monday next week. So today's the 8th of October. So I think on the 11th of October, we should have a store. And I know the printing company is sending the books to Amazon, I think, on Tuesday. So hopefully by Wednesday or Thursday next week, there'll be a link to the Amazon store. And I really appreciate your support in putting this webinar together. And I've printed 2,000 copies, and I really hope that together we can make a $60,000 donation to Black Dog Institute. Absolutely. I will make sure this podcast will go out on the Thursday. So this will be a couple of days after everything's live. So I'll make sure all of the links are there. So if anyone's looking to buy a copy of the book, please head over to startupplaybook.co for all of the details, and follow along on social media as well. As I mentioned, I'll be giving away a few copies of the book as well. David, thank you so much for coming on once again on the podcast, and for sharing your experience and insights, and just giving our listeners a taste of what a fantastic book you've put together as well. Thank you so much. And next time we chat, I'm going to quiz you on Ted Lasso. Thanks. I really sincerely appreciate the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks so much, Rohit. You did an amazing job for the ecosystem. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, David. Thanks for listening to episode 157 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. And as promised, I'll be running a little competition for listeners of the show where all you have to do is comment on the LinkedIn post for this episode with the favorite lesson that you picked up from this or any previous podcast episode. And I will pick a few people at random to send a free copy of David's book to. All right. Well, with that out of the way, I'll be back next week with another episode. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.